This is the Cato Daily Podcast for Tuesday, September 22nd, 2020. I'm Caleb Brown. The president says he will nominate a new justice to the U.S. Supreme Court this week, now just weeks from the presidential election. Cato's Ilya Shapiro is author of the new book, Supreme Disorder: Judicial Nominations and the Politics of America's Highest Court. We spoke yesterday. In general, what do you think this confirmation battle looks like? And give us a sense of the details and what people are pointing to in terms of trying to say this is unprecedented or this is perfectly precedented.
Well, in the long history of the American Republic, there is really little new under the sun. Politics has been a part of the process from the very beginning. George Washington himself had a nominee rejected. And about half of our presidents have had trouble of some kind making appointments. The overall best determinant of whether the nomination is going to be successful is whether the Senate is controlled by the same party as the presidency. When you have that united government, we're looking at about 90% confirmation rate. When you have divided government, we're south of 60%. And that difference is accentuated in presidential election years. So it's going to be a big fight, what we have now, but there's examples of pretty much any development, and it all comes down to political power plays.
Well, how reasonable do you think it is that the president might nominate and the Senate might vote on somebody some 40 days before the election?
Well, 29 times in our history, we've had a vacancy arise during a presidential election year. Every single one of those 29 times, the president has made a nomination. So the fact that President Trump is, as we're recording this, promised to do so in the next few days, that's not unusual at all. And then it goes to the Senate. And we've even had something like this, a vacancy arising so close to the election. In 1956, President Eisenhower, the Senate did not want to go back into session. They were already out campaigning and what have you, and so said, "No, we're not going to do this. Not because we're necessarily opposed to you, but we're just not going to do this." And so he recess appointed, Ike did, Bill Brennan. And how can that be? Ike is a Republican. Brennan, even then, was known as a progressive, kind of on the left side of the New Jersey Supreme Court. But for political reasons, Eisenhower wanted to shore up his support in the metropolitan Northeast and among Catholics. And that worked. He politically successful, but then he later was disappointed, but shouldn't have been surprised with Brennan's jurisprudence.
I guess going forward, we have a few people who have bubbled up to the top of the potential list, even though President Trump recently expanded his list of potential Supreme Court nominees. What do we know about these women?
So the two finalists, and you better get this podcast out because who knows when they're going to come out with the final announcement. But Amy Coney Barrett of the Seventh Circuit in Indiana is a Chicago-based court. Before that, she was a professor at Notre Dame. Somewhere in the Scalia to Thomas view, originalist, textualist, very learned, has an intellectual paper trail. Certain things that I probably disagree with her on, unenumerated rights, for example. She wrote a critique of Randy Barnett's book in that regard, but very popular in the conservative legal movement. And then Barbara Lagoa on the 11th Circuit has been there less than a year, based in Miami. The court's based in Atlanta. She's Cuban-American, served 12 years on the state intermediate appellate court in Florida, and then less than a year on the Florida Supreme Court. And not much is known about her jurisprudence. I'll admit, I do not stay up nights reading opinions from the intermediate state courts of this country. She was obviously vetted by the White House, by the Justice Department in the Trump administration to be put on the 11th Circuit. But I'm telling you, a lot of Justice Department lawyers and others are reading her opinions for information about how committed she is to various kinds of principles and what kind of judge she would be, in addition to the obvious political calculus of having someone from Florida and a Cuban American at that.
In the most positive way you can, speaking as an economist, how do you see this playing out given some reticence by some Republican senators and even some recent polling among Republican voters that they would like this nomination to wait?
Well, so far we have two Republican senators, as of this recording, Collins of Maine and Murkowski of Alaska, who said that they don't want a vote, at least not before the election, maybe even the inauguration. McConnell left himself some wiggle room by saying that he will give the nominee a vote, but did not specify whether before or after the election. A lot of game theory going on here. So is it better to process the nominee and do everything except the final vote and dangle that to voters for the election? Will that drive out the Republican base more than the Democratic base? Or will it convince swing voters? Because historically, the issue of judges, including especially in 2016, has inured to the benefit of Republican candidates. If they hold it till after the election, well, then what happens with the various scenarios if Biden wins and the Democrats take the Senate? Will McConnell try to do some deal with no confirmation in exchange for a promise of no court packing? If Trump is reelected, almost certainly he will want to push for that nomination, because if the Republicans lose the Senate, then he's not going to get a better Senate come inauguration day, come January. And if it's otherwise, the Republicans keep the Senate, Mitch McConnell still the Supreme Court majority leader, he'll want to ram that through, realizing that court packing is now going to be off the table, at least for 4 years. But there's a multidimensional game theory going on there, and everyone's going to try to figure out how their voters are, how it affects their election chances.
Yeah, I was going to mention court packing. This is some prominent Democrats have come out saying, well, this is rank hypocrisy on the part of the president and Mitch McConnell, given how the Merrick Garland nomination was handled in 2016, and therefore court packing is now on the table. We hope to expand the Supreme Court. How seriously should people take that?
Well, it depends how you define hypocrisy. The idea of politicians switching sides on an issue is certainly not new. And you can slice and dice the nuance about whether the Garland position was no confirmation in an election year, whether it was no confirmation when the Senate and White House are controlled by opposite parties, or no confirmation when the president is reelected, but then the other party wins the Senate in the following election. And so you need a kind of a rubber match tiebreaker. And you can argue that. I don't think it matters to voters on either side, really. Voters don't tend to vote on hypocrisy. They tend to vote on the substance of the issue and which president, I guess, or which party they would want appointing or confirming a justice to the Supreme Court, and especially swing voters. I mean, the bases obviously are going to cry foul whatever happens. But again, this is part of the complicated game theory. Ultimately, Caleb, the reason we are at this apocalyptic battle over this seat is because the Supreme Court has gotten to be very powerful. And it's not happened overnight. It's happened over decades. The centralization of power in Washington, and within Washington, a shift from the legislative branch to the executive, the administrative agencies. And so, each seat, what the court decides matters. And so the only way ultimately to decrease the tensions is to make that seat less important. It's not about structural reforms or court packing or whatever else, which will only inflame things further and ratchet it up. It's about rebalancing our constitutional order.
Ilya Shapiro is a senior fellow in constitutional studies at the Cato Institute and author of the new book, Supreme Disorder: Judicial Nominations and the Politics of America's Highest Court. You can subscribe to the Cato Daily Podcast anywhere you please and follow us on Twitter @Cato Podcast.